given nature kind of like a dark, mysterious mood, right? If we go back to the Crucible, for instance, the Scarlet Letter, same thing. How do those Puritans in those stories view the forest? Yeah, it's like, it's where the devil, frolics, right? With the witches and all the other bad things, okay? And then you get to Romanticism with like Washington Irving and Nathaniel Hawthorne too in the Scarlet Letter. I mean, it's like mysterious, right? So here we have a whole different take on nature. Nature is not just this dark, mysterious thing, but nature has not just beauty, but this like power to heal, to lift our spirits. And that's something I think everybody can relate to. Now, the second major component is one of my favorite ideas, but it's a little different, okay? So on the sheet, it says nature gets us closer to God. Okay, that so far so good, right? I mean, in my experience, and I'm old, all right, but in my experience, the places where I feel like closest to God are not necessarily in a church, okay, but, in the wide outdoors, those chances that I get to go to like the beach and look out over the expanse of the ocean, which is so large, it makes me realize that in the big scheme of things, I'm rather small, right? Or the mountains, the wide open areas are where I feel probably like truly the closest to my Creator, okay? But that's me. I don't know. You, of course, may be different, right? He says, by contemplating nature, we transcend this world and discover a connection between the inner soul and the oversoul, which we talked about a minute ago, okay? Here's what Emerson writes. The currents of the universal being circulate through me, and I love this, y'all. If you didn't highlight it, do that now. I am part and parcel of God.
Where are we?
Okay, we are in Major Beliefs number 2. Okay? I am part and parcel of God. What a cool idea. He says that because God created us, there's, God within all of us. And y'all, the beauty of this is that it's such an optimistic look at human nature. I mean, again, going back to those Puritans, they believed in original sin. That's that Adam and Eve fell from grace, were given the boot, right? Had to leave paradise, and their descendants forever after would be born into what? Sin. So instead of having like this negative outlook on what humans are, here is something really positive. Now, this connects to the third major belief, okay? And the third major belief is something that is, to me, very practical. It's one that we can kind of sink our teeth into, okay? He says we should follow our own intuition. The idea is, if there is like this piece of the Creator in all of us, if we can tune into that piece of the Creator, our intuition, our voice that tells us when we're screwing up, like maybe it's your conscience. If you do something that is wrong, maybe it's that voice that's like, shouldn't have done that, right? Or maybe like Huck Finn, character, I know he's fictional, but maybe like Huck, who has that tension between what society's telling him to do and what his heart is telling him to do. I mean, he taps into his heart and is ultimately going to do what we all know is right, even though at the time society said it was wrong. So if you tap into your intuition, your gut, your heart, it's going to steer you in the right direction. So if you ignore that, you're never going to be satisfied. Okay? It's a great idea. It's a great idea. And here is what he said. Now, he's super, super quotable, okay? He says, trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string. Great line. It's an aphorism, okay? Great line, though, because, yeah, it's one thing to say, trust your heart, but he calls it an iron string. Now, how big is a string? Yeah, well, it depends on what kind of string it is. I mean, relatively speaking, it's thin, right? But it's made of iron, which is kind of cool. So it's strong. Yeah. Say it again?
Can you re-say it?
Oh, yeah, it's on here.
Oh.
Yeah, it's that last line in major relief number 3. You see it?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So, all right, let's talk about Emerson himself. Emerson is one of these guys who, I mean, he's a genius. First of all, he entered Harvard at 14. That's pretty impressive. Even though more people got into Harvard back then than who do now, obviously, there were fewer people in America that were seeking a higher education, right? But, I mean, this guy's a genius. He's a philosopher. He is a speaker, you know, makes his money on lecture tours, okay? He's a poet. This essayist, I mean, he does a little bit of everything. He's essentially making his money on being an intellect. Now, I've always thought it was interesting that his second wife has money. First wife dies young, okay? But when he remarries, he marries a woman who has a lot of money, right? And if you're going to make a living on being an intellectual, let me just tell you, it helps to have a wealthy spouse, okay? Like if you go home to your parents and you're like, I've decided that I'm gonna major in philosophy, your parents are gonna be like, no, you're not. That is not happening, okay? It's not super practical. But for him, it works. He had the genius to pull it off, okay? So you want to remember him as a philosopher, an essayist, and I just made out your multiple choice questions last night, so I know what I'm talking about here. You also want to remember that he is the father of Transcendentalism, okay? I think it's on there. If it's not, shame on me. He is the father of Transcendentalism, okay? Now, we're going to get to a guy named Henry David Thoreau, but not before your midterm. I had to split the two, unfortunately, before the test. So the second transcendentalist we're going to look at is Emerson's student. So Emerson's considered the father because he's the first to talk about this stuff. And then you have Henry David Thoreau who comes along and kind of takes his work and runs with it. So we'll talk more about him later on. All right, so real quick, nature. This is the first paragraph of Nature. And he says, to go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber, his room, as from society. I am not solitary while I read and write, though nobody is with me. Now, that's almost a paradox, y'all. Well, it is a paradox, actually. How can you say that you're not solitary while you're reading a book? Even if nobody else is in the room with you.
Because when you read, your mind comes alive.
Who was that? Hadley, good job. Yeah, because when you're reading, your mind is occupied with the characters in the story, right? So he says to truly have solitude, you've got to leave all those distractions behind. And again, I think it's harder today to do it than it was 150 years ago, okay? Now, he talks about the stars. This is such a cool, point that he makes here. He says, if the stars only came out in the night sky once in 1,000 years, what a miracle. The folks lucky enough to be alive and witness this what a miracle they would think the stars were. He says they're no less a miracle today just because we get to see them every night, right? Or almost every night, depending on how cloudy it is. Okay? We just don't often take the time to kind of let them, Let me rephrase. We don't often take the time to, appreciate the mystery and the beauty of the stars. So it's a nice reminder that, thank you. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. I'm right here.
All right. That's great. Okay, so we don't often, take the time to appreciate the miracles that are around us. And that's a theme that we're going to talk about quite a bit this spring. Okay? All right, last but not least, pull out Huck Finn, because I got caught by the bell yesterday. And we have got to finish talking about that. It's chapter 31. Yeah.
Can you give an example of how Huck and Transcendental, the word, how they go together?
Okay, so, well, I tell you, it'll be more clear after I talk about this passage. Okay? All right. Yeah. All right. Okay, so chapter 31, we started reading it, and then I was so surprised when the bell rang. That was like, that doesn't always happen, but I really was, this hour flew by yesterday to me, maybe not to you. All right, so Huck in the chapter 31, if you'll remember, is talking about how the Spanish moss is kind of, dripping from the trees. It makes them look solemn like old men with long beards. And we discussed that this probably indicates, where are they right now? Yeah, they're in Louisiana. So Huck Finn, the book, ends in Louisiana, okay? And then we discovered that the con men, who are pretty despicable human beings, have committed the ultimate betrayal. What did they do? They sold Jim. They sold Jim, okay? And Huck is now conflicted again, right? To him, it's kind of like, well, did this happen because I was doing the wrong thing by helping Jim, right? I mean, is this a sign that I need to get back to the straight and narrow, which, strangely enough, we know would be the wrong thing to do, okay? So I think we need to pick up now, in my book it's about 3 pages in, where he says, and you can tell me if we already read this, there's a paragraph that starts, once I said to myself it'd be 1,000 times better for Jim to be a slave at home. Do y'all see that paragraph? Okay. I don't think we got to that part, so if you will, well, just read with me for a second. So, all right, Jim's been taken back into slavery, and here is his, thinking. He says, once I said to myself, it would be 1,000 times better for Jim to be a slave at home where his family was, as long as he's got to be a slave, which makes sense. If he's going to have to be a slave, at least he would be with loved ones, right? But then he decides against that because he thinks that he would be punished, more if he returned home. And let's see, skip down about 10 lines to where it says, that was my fix exactly. And it's one of those deals where you have to find it in the middle of the paragraph. So do y'all see it? Okay, good. Get your highlighters ready, okay? This is the climax of our story. The more I studied about this was my fix exactly. The more I studied about this, the more my conscience went to grinding me. And the more wicked and low down and ornery I got to feeling. And at last, it hit me. All of a sudden, here was the plain hand of providence. That's God, y'all. Slapping me in the face and letting me know my wickedness was being watched all the time from up there in heaven. Okay, so he has got it all wrong, right? He says, this is God telling me that I should not have been helping Jim. It was not my right to do so, right? That I should have turned him in from the very beginning. Now, what Twain said of this is that his conscience has been corrupted by that society. The irony is that he thinks he's going to do good by turning Jim in, when really we know that that would be him doing bad, and then vice versa. Okay? So he's going to decide that he is going to write Miss Watson a note and let her know where Jim is. Now, here is something that is truly shocking. He says this, just kind of listen. He says, I tried the best to kind of soften it up somehow for myself by saying I was brung up wicked. I'm helping Jim because I was brung up wicked. Hadley, bear with me. You look like I'm about to lose you.
Sorry, no,
Okay.
I'm listening.
All right. And so I weren't so much to blame, but listen to this, y'all. Something inside of me kept saying, there was Sunday school. You could have gone to it, and if you'd have done that, they'd have learnt you there that people that acts as I've been acting towards Jim goes to everlasting fire. Wow. What a comment on organized religion in the South pre-Civil War. This idea that even in church, they used the Bible to justify slavery. They did, y'all. You can almost justify anything you want to if you take it out of context, right? And so he says, had I gone to Sunday school, I would have known that I was doing the wrong thing. Now, this is Twain trying to get across to us that that's wrong. That's wrong. Okay? But you have to be a really good reader to catch that. Okay? Made me shiver, and I was about made up my mind to pray and see if I couldn't quit being the kind of boy I was and be better, but I kneeled down and the words wouldn't come. You can't pray because it would be like, a false prayer, right? So he writes the note. Now skip the note and go down. Okay, Bailey, get off that phone, girl. All right, he says, I felt good and all washed clean of sin for the first time I'd ever felt so in my life. I knowed I could pray now, but I didn't do it straight off. I laid that paper down and I sat there thinking about how good it was that all this happened so and how near I come to being lost and going to hell. And I went on thinking, and I got to thinking over the trip down the river, and essentially he says, I couldn't think of anything bad about Jim. Jim's done all these good things for him. Jim used to keep watch so that Huck could sleep longer. I mean, he's just been a good friend. And he says things about how Jim, when he told the people they had smallpox on the boat, or on the raft rather, to, keep Jim safe. Jim says, you're the best friend I've only had, and you're the only friend I have now. And he says at the end of that paragraph, and I want you to find it because you need to highlight this stuff. He said, I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, the only one he's got now. Do you see that? Okay. And highlight this. And then I looked around and I saw that paper. He saw the note that was going to turn Jim in, right? It was a close place. Keep highlighting. I took it up. And I held it in my hand, and I was trembling because I got to decide forever between two things. Going to hell, going to heaven, doing, what he thinks is the wrong thing, helping Jim or whatever, right? Okay? I was trembling because I got to decide forever betwixt two things, and I knowed it. I studied a minute, sort of hold my breath, and then I says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell. And tore it up. Y'all, that's the climax of this book. Now, unfortunately, it happens 100 pages before the end, right? But what has he decided? His head or his heart? His heart. All right, so, Bess, this is for you, all right? And the rest of y'all, actually. He, in this case, has tapped into what Emerson would say is his intuition, his heart, right? That heart that something to an iron string, right? I can't remember what it was. But, he does what he knows in his heart is right, even if it goes against society. Okay? That's the kind of thing I'm looking for in this essay that you're going to do for the midterm. Got it?
So it's just tying the trans thing
Yeah.
in the book?
Absolutely. Well, not the whole book. You're really looking at Huck's behavior. You know what I mean? Okay, so here's what you got, and we don't have as much time, but you got time to get started. This is due at midnight, okay? So there is, there are two links. One is to this, which carries into nature and then self-reliance. You want to read those, and as you're reading, you want to highlight lines that stand out to you, because the second link is to a Google form, and essentially it asks for you to pull quotes from the form, okay, or not the form, sorry, from each essay, and then explain them. So if I'm you, I'm working smart and I'm pulling quotes that are interesting but also might be usable on the essay. Does that make sense? Okay, now if you do start the Google form and you're kind of working on both at the same time, just remember you can't close that Google form, right? Or you'll lose it. Got it? Okay, does anybody need a loaner laptop or is everybody set? Yeah, you need one, Catherine? Okay. All right, everybody else has got one. All right. There's that. There's that. Okay. And then I need got kind of a special. Let me see who I need out of this class. Come here, Emily. Okay. Okay, so this is pretty much auto focus. Okay, you just have to push it down and it will like depress a little bit and then you gotta like push it through. But it's pretty obvious. I need like waist high pictures of Charlie and Bailey Gosley and Bailey Monk. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else in this class. That's it. Okay. So Charlie and my two Baileys, y'all come see me real quick, okay? You're not in trouble. Except for Charlie, because he's trying to finish his choice reading.
I'll finish that. I just haven't made a video.
Well, that's even worse. That means you're just reading. I mean, I'm glad that you're a reader. I love that, but I, prefer you to read well. I like for you to read at the time. But you're gonna take pictures of them. Take their IDs off when you take the picture. You don't have to look at them. Okay. You're gonna take them outside and post them against different backgrounds. And take like several pictures of each. It's for your book. Okay. I'm not gonna tell you right now, but you'll find out later. Okay. And then, but don't take more than like 10 minutes. Okay. So it's gonna have to be kind of quick. Okay.
So just like
You like.
I'm taking pictures.
Yeah. Let me show you
Individually?
Yeah. Let me show you what we did. Look. Okay, but you probably don't use those backgrounds. You're gonna find something different. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So I just.
Yep. Here, just take a picture.
Okay. So I just like that.
Mm-hmm.
You have a page dedicated to your book.
I should totally do that.
So she has it already.
Try it again. There we go.
How ridiculous is that? Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Okay, go. Keep on with me, okay? Keep an eye on the clock, okay?
Oh, yeah, I have mine. I just don't do it. I have to close it.
Well, just read this up part. So go ahead and highlight about 5 quotes in each, then one, okay? And then later you just copy in and then talk about it in there, okay? I mean, we're at that point in the year that y'all need every minute because y'all are busy.